Alright, so this video is going to be a basic overview of installing a first TPI onto a carbureted vehicle. We will be using the Fast 2.0 system, but we won't talk too much about that so much as we will be on installing the first TPI itself. We will be doing a GM Corvette, Trans Am install video on those for those who need to see how that's done as well. Okay, we're going to start this disassembly so we can install first fuel injection system on this awesome 77 Monza. Basically, you want to drain the fluids right away. Make sure you disconnect the battery. Mark your spark plug wires firing order so you don't get twisted around about that when you go putting it back together. Set it to top dead center. See the picture I posted, and we're going to go from there. Basically start taking it apart. Okay, we are back on the 1977 Monza project, and I wanted to take a minute to talk about fitting of the base. You want to check the pre-fit of this while it's dry. No silicone. You can see I put tape on the edges to hold the gaskets in place so we can be sure it's the right height. When we cast the base manifolds, we cast them in a 1204 port, which is small, so we can actually CNC the port out and grow it all the way up to a Vortec head like this height on this particular head, which allows us to use one casting for all different head sizes. The problem with that is there's a lot of extra material on top of the port. So if you have a small port head and there's a big ridge here on a lot of heads, it may not fall down inside of that ridge. So we have to machine that off. That's why it's important that we know what type of head you're using this on so we can have that set for you. It's also important to know that because if you buy a used one or one off of eBay, it may not work. You want to pay particular attention, like I said, to these ridges because some of them are really down close to the port. That edge has to come off. The other thing you want to look for is your oil pressure sending unit fittings as well. Obviously, you're going to have to make like a 90 or a 45 to get it away from the manifold because our runner kind of kicks over that and blocks it. You want to determine that now before you put the base on, because once the base is on, it's really difficult to get to. So you have a couple different versions. You have like this big version with a nipple that goes in it, or you can get one that's already has the nipple part of it and it's a small 90, and you can see it's much smaller. You can use the big ones. Sometimes you can't position them where you need to go because they're so big and it'll hit the base manifold, but you can grind these little edges down, which will help you fit it. But just for purposes of showing you that the large ones will work, I'm going to just loosely put it in here and dry fit the base with it. That way you can see that, yeah, you can still use the big ones if you have it in your possession. It's just that it's a little easier to use the small one. Gives you a lot more room. So we're going to put our sending unit on here so we know it's pointing where it wants to go or where we want it to go, and then we'll fit the base. Basically, I'm just going to gently set this down here. Make sure it sits down in the valley nice. Check hole locations, which they are totally fine. You can see that it's back far enough to fit all the bolts. Everything lines up, so we can confirm that this base will fit, and you can see there's a plenty of room up here on top to clear this ridge. But you definitely want to make sure you check that before you go and put silicone on it and then try to plant this down and then figure out, oh yeah, I forgot I got to get that fitting in there for the oil pressure, because you can see how this kind of goes over it and blocks it. Before we button up the top half, of course, we're going to mount our fuel rails and our fuel lines in our system so we can actually pressurize it before we put the plenum and runners on. That way we can check for leaks and the fuel rails are totally accessible, and it's not a pain taking it all back apart to fix a leak that we could have caught now. So that's another helpful tip there for you. So hopefully this little clip helps you kind of look for some stuff that you may not have thought about doing right off to the get-go. Okay, so we're back on the Monza project, and I wanted to touch on the fuel system install real quick. You can see that we have the base mounted. I have all the bolts in it. It's all mounted down. That's pretty self-explanatory. I'm pretty sure everybody knows how to put a base manifold on. Torque specs, 25 pounds. Work your way out from the center in a circular motion, cross those corners. When you tighten them, you can see the pictures that we added to show you the sequence and the torque spec. Fuel rails are already mounted. You can see that I have the injectors in. I made this nice little crossover steel line, which just consists of some fittings that go to inverted flare, 3/8 MPT. So that's what these are here. We can use a steel line with inverted flare. Simple bend, really easy to do. Not too much involved with it to convert it over. You can use a basic flare tool and a tubing bender to do that. Basically looks like this. You can make a couple little bends. You can get these Imperials. This is a Cornwell. You can use an Imperial. I actually got a few of these around, but they do good. I also made a pre-made line, steel line. See if we can get this in video for you. You can see I made a few bends. This line will be going right here to this fitting right here. Now when I did this line, I obviously measured it with, like, what's really easy to use is a piece of wire, like a regular old piece of copper wire. You can see you can kind of bend it around real easy. You can use this to mock up your bends, your lengths, so forth. Comes in handy. Also, you want to make sure you check for clearance with your distributor. Hold down. I actually put the distributor in with the cap just so you can make sure that it does clear all that. Really easy to double check that now before you get too far into custom bends and are not able to basically just put that in until it drops down. Take your distributor cap, put it on so you can check your clearances, which you can see we have plenty of clearance here. Not to worry about that. We're also going to mount our coil here, so I made sure that I had clearance for that. I'm going to mount this with some little brackets that I have made. Just a basic 90-degree bracket that'll mount to here with some thick plate that'll slide up in here, bolt through those holes there, and mount to here. We'll get into that more when we do the electrical side, but in reality, we're going to go MPT hardline here. We just don't mount it rigid to the firewall, so we have a little bit of engine flex for the line. Then we're going to obviously come through the rail to our crossover, and this can be done back to front, either way you choose. I'm going out to a 6AN fitting because we got a fast fuel pressure regulator that has these AN ports. You can use an aeromotive style that has 3/8 MPT, which I do often as well. But you basically, you know, a couple 6AN fittings here. This is a barb because it's a return. So on the return side, you can see it says return here. On the return side, you don't need to have, you need to have fuel injected rated hose, but it's not high pressure, so you can get away with a clamped barb or what have you. It's not really under that much pressure because it's returning. As you can see, it doesn't take too many fittings. You know, 1, 2, 3 ANs, 6 ANs, and then a barb, a plug, of course. Fast includes this. You do need to get a good quality fuel pressure gauge. Other than that, you have to build a, in this case I pre-built a little hose that goes from the rail here so I pre-mocked all this up before, obviously, because you want to kind of think this through before you go into any kind of lockdown with your system. We're going to mount this fast regulator right up here to the firewall. I'll kind of knock it up here for you so you can see how I did it. It's going to go here. And then this line will connect. To it, like so. Should get it all kind of loosely in place. Now obviously you want to go back, make sure you tighten everything up. That will complete the high pressure side in through the steel, through the AN hosing, steel braided, into the regulator, out with the hose barb to the return side. And you can pretty much do this any way you want. There's a lot of options. You can use MPT like I did. You could use all AN fittings. Basically, there's a whole bunch of different fittings, MPTs. This is a coupler for connecting the steel feed line. So when you're making the line back, if you don't have a continuous run, you can connect them to that. You can use standard brass straight barbs. All that's available, pretty simple, through your local parts store. So that shouldn't be hard to come by. Like I said, bending the hoses is pretty simple. There's not a lot to that. Creating the steel lines, that's not so bad either. Just like I said, just make sure you put your cap in place like I got here, so you can see you got plenty of clearance here, plenty of clearance here. Everything's out of the way, so you won't have no problems there. Fuel injectors, we'll touch on them a little bit. You can see this is a style that you normally would have, you know, on a basic 85 to 92 TPI, thicker body Bosch. You can use the thinner stuff, it's not a problem. Make sure the O-ring height's the same, diameter is the same, but they work just the same as long as all that's there. I have this particular style in. When you install these, you just basically put a little bit of a lube on the O-ring, I like to use WD-40, just slick them up a little bit, pop them into place, pop them onto the rail, mount the rail down. In this case, you know, I would mount one side, I leave this loose so I can pivot it up out of the way, and then drop this down on top of this side together, you know, as a plan to keep it all in uniform. Makes it easier to go on. You know, check the rotation of the injectors. They should spin. Some are going to be harder than others because, you know, O-ring sizes vary and things like that. Nothing to be worried about. They should be fine either way. You just want to make sure that they're, you know, in there properly, and you lube them up so you don't rip the O-ring when you're installing them. Other than that, you want to make all your connections, fire up the fuel pump, pressurize everything just like it sits now so you can check for leaks anywhere. Injector leaks, hose lines, fuel pressure regulator leaks, any kind of fitting leaks. Do that now before you put this up. You can definitely use a runner as well to check clearance, which that way you know you're not going to be, you know, hitting your fuel pressure regulator or anything like that. Another good thing to do is mount this before you put the top on. Get this one started, all 3 bolts in the bottom. That way you can get to this inside one here easier than if it was all put together with the plenum in your way and you were trying to put this up. It's like if you started over here with the runners and everything, this cross bolt inside there, it can be tricky. So you want to make sure you look into that before you go too far, because otherwise you kind of box yourself into a little bit of a corner. Which I will get this runner together here. What I like to do is take the runner, and see I kind of set the gasket on it, put the bolt through it, hold the gasket, take my 3/16 wobble, bring the runner into place. Try to get things started outside of it. Sometimes if you can't get that bottom bolt started relatively easy, you can start with this corner. That way it'll kind of help you hold the gasket in place. And I just use the Allen wrench to start it. My hands are kind of fat. I can't get into these little areas so well. Should come over to this side. Come across. Make sure you got the gasket set so you can run that in by hand. I like to snug it up so there's just a little bit of movement still, but not tight all the way until you get it all put together. Otherwise, it'll fight you. Just slide that one right down in there. With this being a little loose, you can actually wiggle it around a little bit. Again, you don't want to go too tight with this stuff until it's all together, but at least if you get all the bolts started, you know, you can move this around when you're lining up the plenum, as I'll show you when we get into the electrical side here. But other than that, you get that, you know, start it there, and sometimes these wobbles like to give you some guff getting them out because they kind of wedge in there goofy, but you know, take your time, be patient, it works out well. But other than that, as long as you do all your double checking before you build the top half, make sure there's no leaks, you're good to go. And like I said, bending these steel lines really is not that difficult. Just take your time, mock it up, like I said, with a little piece of wire. Get your measurements right. Get yourself a good piece of equipment to bend them. Those benders are like 40, 50 bucks somewhere online. I'm sure you can get them maybe cheaper, more if you buy them off a tool truck, but you don't necessarily need to do that. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and obviously finish the bottom. We'll run back to the tank with the feed line. We have this fast fuel pressure sensor that has to go in line, which will go back by the tank. We got a Russell fuel filter that goes to there, and we will make our connections. We have an in-tank pump on this particular vehicle, so we'll just be making a connection from that to this with AN, as you can see, and then out to AN, and adapt that to our steel line. So we'll have steel all the way up, except for the tank little section will be braided, then it'll be steel all the way to the engine. I like to have as much steel line as possible on the high pressure side. So yeah, hopefully that helps you kind of figure out what to do and what not to do with fuel systems. We'll pick up where we do the electrical next. I will run the harness, get all these sensors plugged in. A lot of this stuff will mount the sensors on the bench. I'll show you that when we put it together, and then we'll just have our harness run up through the center here and make our connections to our fuel injectors and our throttle body sensors, and our manifold air temp sense is going to be right here. So I just wanted to jump on this electrical real quick and kind of show you guys what I got going on here. I ran all the harness in between the fuel rails. You can see everything's clearly marked by fast. You know, map, air temp, idle control motor, throttle body, which is your TPS. Injector harnesses can go on either side as long as you keep the 4 together per loom. There's no specific side, so you can take these 4 and put them over here, and those 4 and put them over here, whatever you choose to do. It'll work either way. The important thing is to try to, like I have everything mounted like where the air temp's going to go on the plenum. Map sensor is going to go here. All the forward mounted stuff is already in. I put the coolant sensor in. Harness is right here. I don't know how well you can see it or not, but it's already installed. Plugs in here. Yes, the thermostat will fit. Some guys, I painted this red so you can see it. Some guys call up and say it don't fit, but they don't twist it. There's like an open spot here. It'll fit right in there. Bam. There you go with that. So this is hooked up. Snaps in, no problem. All the injectors are plugged in. Everything's good. I'm going to run a grommet right to the back here. You can see I just kind of took the one that Fast gave me. I split it so I could wrap it around the wiring when I'm done, because I have to tuck the distributor wire in there because I have all the main harness inside the car, because there's a lot of room in there to mount it all up inside the car instead of having it all hanging out here. It gets really, really hectic with all them wiring here. I have the pressure for the fuel sender they give you for the sensor, fuel pressure sensor. I run that right along this fuel line that you can see. I run it with it all the way to the back. The O2 sensor plug harness comes out. I just tuck that down, bell housing to the O2 sensor. That's pretty much it for the harness up here. I'm going to mount the coil on these 2 little tabs here. Basically, Fast wants this grounded, so these metal tabs are mounted right to the intake, and then it just slides on this and goes all the way down. Bam, nice and tight, snug fit. I'll put their mounting bolts through. It'll sandwich these metal tabs, which will in turn ground that. Call that a day. The distributor drops in at 30 degrees on this system. The Sportsman is a little different. I guess you can go 50 degrees. Just make sure you got your gasket on there. This tight, drop down. You want to point this, here let me show you. I marked it number 1. You want to point the rotor to number 1, and you want to put the balancer to 30 on top dead center, 30 degrees, which I have a picture that I will post with it to show you what I mean by that. So once you get that down, your distributor's in,